2021 is drawing to a close, which means it's time for me to reflect on all that the year had to offer in terms of cinema. For this video, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 least favorite movies of 2021. Before I start my countdown, just a couple of caveats I want to make sure that I put out there. First of all, this is of course a subjective list. This is based on what I enjoyed. These are not necessarily the worst made movies of the year or the worst produced or worst acted or whatever. They're just the movies that I did not enjoy as much as the rest. So if there's a movie on this list that you really enjoyed, that's how opinions work. You're allowed to have yours and I'm allowed to have mine. So don't get offended if I have a movie on this list that you really enjoyed. There aren't really any necessarily bad movies on this list, which is part of the reason that I'm not going to title this video the top 10 worst movies of the year. All of these movies did have some sort of redeeming quality about it. I also am just trying to kind of change how I talk about movies. I want to still acknowledge that even myself, couldn't make a movie as good as any of these, even though I didn't enjoy these as much. I still want to acknowledge that it took talent and effort to make these. So again, I'm just kind of trying to change my dialogue about how I talk about movies like this. And lastly, this year didn't have as many stinkers as 2020 did. Like I said, a lot of these movies did have something that I enjoyed, so this list is really a combination of movies that I did not enjoy as much or just that were kind of disappointing or forgettable. So it's kind of a combination of all three of those things. So without further ado, let's get into the list, and number 10 on my list is The Boss Baby 2. I watched the first Boss Baby maybe a few years ago on Netflix, and it's not a bad movie, it's just not my thing. It's obviously intended for families and for children. This one is the same. I didn't have any intention of watching this when it came out on Peacock, but I was like, whatever, it's a Monday, I got nothing to do. So I sat down and watched it, and just like the first one, there's nothing offensive about it. There's just a lot going on, and there's definitely some scenes that you can tell they were just for the kids, because we don't want them to stop paying attention. Let's just throw as much on the screen as we can. And it got a little overwhelming at certain points. I do enjoy Alec Baldwin as the voice actor of the baby. I think it kind of works, but it's not a movie that's made for me, and hence, it didn't really do it for me. But it was definitely not my least favorite of the year, but it does slot in this list at number 10. The next movie on my list is definitely one that falls under the disappointing category, and that's going to be Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage. Now, I did enjoy this movie more than the first one. I really enjoyed how they kind of leaned into the Venom and Eddie Brock dynamic and made it almost like a buddy, bromance almost type of movie. But as short as this movie was, it still felt like it kind of dragged on and nothing was happening until the end, which is I feel like an accomplishment maybe for a movie, but it was so weird. It was such a short movie, and the scenes were moving so quickly, but they were also scenes where I was like, okay, that didn't do anything for the plot. That didn't advance the story. And then it just got to the end, the final battle, and it just kind of happened, and it was short. And then the post-credit scene happened, which was honestly the best part of the movie. Like I said, it wasn't a bad movie. I still, I guess, had a relatively enjoyable time, but I was hoping for more, so that's why Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage finds itself at number 9 on my list. This next movie on my list, number 8, I definitely expected to be on this top 10 least best movies list before I watched it, which is maybe a bad mindset to go into. I did think it would be worse. I thought I would enjoy it less, but there were aspects of it that I actually enjoyed a little bit more, and that movie was Jungle Cruise. The big issue for me in this movie, honestly, is just the CGI. I didn't think the effects were very good, which is maybe a shallow thing to, knock a movie for, but it really took me out of it at certain points. The way they animated some of the CGI characters, the way that the green screen was pretty obvious throughout most of the movie, it was just kind of a CGI mess. The plot wasn't terrible. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Emily Blunt I thought were awesome. They had really good chemistry and were the best part of the movie. If it wasn't for them, this movie would have been much higher on my list. But it was just one of those movies where there was a lot going on and it just didn't work for me. So that's why Jungle Cruise finds itself in my top 10 least best movies of 2021. The next movie on my list I think would have worked a lot better if it had been made into a series instead of a movie, and that movie is Thunder Force. Just like with Jungle Cruise, I did kind of anticipate this movie finding its way onto this list. I did watch it right when it came out, though. With Jungle Cruise, I waited until recently to watch it when it was on Disney Plus. Thunder Force, I watched like the first weekend it came out on Netflix, and then I actually posted a review on it as well. Like, the movie is about these two former best friends getting like superpowers, basically, and then deciding to form like a crime fighting duo. But most of the parts of the movie where they're fighting crime is just like done in a montage where we don't actually see them fighting the crime. We only see them like in the final battle, which I think again would have lent itself a little bit better to a series where if like each episode in the show they were dealing with a different crime or issue or whatever. But it just kind of sped along. Honestly, the best part of the movie was Jason Bateman as a dude with like crab hands or something. I thought he was really funny. But other than that, the movie was kind of forgettable. I thought it was an interesting like premise, but the execution just wasn't there for me. So that's why Thunder Force is on this list. This next movie is another one that I didn't watch when it initially came out, and I think the negative press and reviews that this movie got maybe prevented me from wanting to see it. It had a lot of potential, has some good actors in it that could have elevated the source material, but it was just kind of a mess, and that movie is Chaos Walking. This movie is based on a book series, I think. I don't think it's just one book, and that is one thing that hurts this movie, is that the movie just leaves off like kind of on a cliffhanger. Like you can tell that they left room for them to make more of these, but with the reviews that it got, and I don't think it made a lot of money either, I'm pretty sure we're not going to get any more, which does add to the disappointment because it's not a complete story. Also, if you're not familiar with the concept of this movie, it's where there's a planet where there's only men left and they have these things, it's called like noise, I think, where their thoughts are like visible and you can hear them. And again, that's an interesting concept, right? Oh, and then also Daisy Ridley shows up and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a woman. What's happening? And again, I think the concept is interesting, but in execution, when you have like a bunch of guys in a scene and all you hear is like their thoughts being all jumbled about, it's just a lot going on. So that made it kind of difficult to watch. Again, I think Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley did their best. Also, Mads Mikkelsen is in this movie and he does fine. It's just the execution, and like I don't think as interesting as the concept is, it just doesn't seem like it lends itself well to a movie adaptation. And then again, the fact that they just kind of ended it in the middle of the story, that's why this movie's on my list. Okay, we're into the top 5 here, and number 5 on my list of least favorite movies of 2021 is Vacation Friends. This movie came out on Hulu, I think, either late in the summer or early fall. The basic concept is there's these two couples who meet up in Mexico. One couple is kind of uptight. The other one, who has John Cena as the male, lead, and I forget who the actress is, but they're like free-spirited, just anything goes. They're like the yes couple. They want to say yes to everything. And so they meet in Mexico, and they're all hanging out and doing drugs and stuff. And then the movie kind of changes. Like, I honestly expected them to just be hanging out in Mexico the whole time, but then like half an hour into the movie, their vacation ends and they go back to their regular lives. And then it turns out that there was something that happened while they were on vacation that they have to deal with now when they get back, which I did not think that's what the movie was going to be about. And it just kind of threw me off. Not that like it wasn't a terrible movie. I thought it was pretty funny, but it was just one of those like made for streaming movies that is just going to be like pretty average quality. It'll have some high moments, but most of it is just going to be average. It wasn't forgettable for sure. It just was a pretty completely average movie, which is why Vacation Friends finds itself at number 5 on my list. This next movie is one of the first that I watched this year, and after watching it was not one that I initially thought would be on this list, but after looking at the movies I had seen, it just kind of made it here by default, and that movie is Malcolm and Marie. I don't think I ever did a review on this movie, so the basic plot is Zendaya and John David Washington are a couple who are arriving home the night after John David Washington's character wins some sort of movie award. And the whole movie takes place over the course of one evening, and it's also all shot in black and white, by the way. And the whole movie is just the two of them arguing about random stuff. Some of it is pretty mundane. Some of it you can tell is an attempt to make the script kind of like a political commentary. But the movie is really frustrating in the fact that they'll start arguing about something. They'll resolve that argument, go into like separate rooms and kind of decompress. And then Zendaya or John David Washington, like, they'll approach the other person and just find something else to start arguing about again. And it's just constantly how the movie is. They argue, they stop, they go separate rooms, come back and keep arguing. And the acting is fine. Like, I thought that they delivered the lines really well, especially John David Washington. Like, I thought his delivery was awesome. Their performances were fine. It was just a really irritating thing to watch because you're like, okay, they're done arguing. What's going to happen next in the plot? Oh, they're just going to keep arguing again. And it was just that constant flow that just kind of got on my nerves after a certain point. So that's why Malcolm and Marie finds itself on this list. We're into the top 3, the podium positions, and my third least best movie of the year was actually the first one that I watched of the year, and I kind of knew when I watched it that it was going to be on this list, and that movie is Outside the Wire. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember the exact plot. I do remember it takes place in the future, and there are like robot soldiers and like hybrid robot soldiers that are combined with humans, and there's kind of like an AI commentary type deal going on. All I remember is that the plot, it was pretty generic, like that's not a new idea. I also remember it being very like, not exposition heavy, but like things just get explained. So like an example, there's one scene where the two characters are walking into a city and the one character goes, "This is the city we're about to enter." And the one character goes, "Oh, you mean the city where this happened and all this happened?" And it's like, that's how we get to understand the importance of this place. Like, it's just told to us by one of the characters. It's just kind of lazy writing in that aspect. I thought there were some generic things, again, that went on kind of near the end of the movie. It was just one of those forgettable movies, one of those pretty average Netflix movies, which is why it finds itself at number 3 on this list. This next movie on my list is a really interesting case. So it is a very well-made movie. Like, the writing is great. The acting is great. It's directed well. The cast is awesome. Like, there's no shortage of superstar actors and actresses in this movie. What my problem with it is, you know, throughout the year, I go back and look at my list because people ask me, like, hey, you know, where is your list at? What are you thinking as your top movies and you know, least favorite movies? And this is that one movie, and there's one of them every year where I would be looking at my list and I would see that name and be like, what movie was that? I don't remember what it was. And that for me was a main reason why it's at number 2 on my list, because it was so forgettable. But it also kind of ends up being about something else near the end, which I thought was weird. And that movie is No Sudden Move. This movie came out over the summer and was advertised as like a crime drama, like thriller where everyone had their own motives and were trying to like double cross one another, which is cool. Like, that's a cool concept. But then when you're watching the movie and you get to the end and it is revealed what all of these different parties were trying to maneuver in position to get, like they were trying to get something, and you realize what the movie was actually about, it just didn't make sense for me to tell that story in this way. Like, this movie is loosely based on a true story, and when it's revealed what that was, I was just kind of taken aback that they chose to tell that story in like a crime story. It just, the two concepts didn't match in my mind. And then again, combined with it being just kind of a slow movie and forgettable, that's why it's on my list. I don't think it would be a bad movie. Like, saying it's a bad movie doesn't do it justice. I think there's a lot of people who enjoyed this movie. It got like half decent reviews, but for me, it was just so forgettable and so slow that it gets the silver medal for least favorite movie of the year. Well, here we are, the number 1 spot. My least favorite movie of the year, what I think is the least best movie of 2021. This movie had a very interesting concept, but in execution just failed spectacularly. And that movie is Awake. If you haven't heard of this movie, I'm not surprised. I don't think it was advertised very much. It came out on Netflix, so it probably got lost in the shuffle. You know, Netflix is releasing movies all the time. The basic summary of this movie is this. Some sort of extraterrestrial event occurs. that prevents people from being able to sleep. They're no longer able to sleep. However, there is one of the main characters, a little girl, who is able to sleep. So the movie revolves around the family of this little girl trying to sort of figure out what's going on, but also protect her, because there are government agencies and then just people who are freaking out because she can sleep. And the family is trying to protect her. And they're also trying to get her to this place so they can potentially study her for the cure. And there's just a lot of stuff for this movie that does not work for me. The first thing is, just from a filmmaking standpoint, the editing was super choppy. It did not flow at all. One scene would be going on, that scene would end, and then the next scene just like didn't connect to it really. It just like didn't flow. So it was just a very choppy movie. Nothing really flowed for the duration of the runtime. I also felt like some of the writing, they had to add things to the story to make it progress faster. So this might be a slight spoiler, but so basically no one can sleep, but they still feel the effects of exhaustion. So obviously, like in real life, if you don't sleep for a certain amount of time, your brain starts to, lose function. You kind of start to lose your mind, right? And they decide in this movie that is going to happen still, but at an increasing rate for whatever reason. They're just like, okay, you're going to start losing your mind, but it's going to happen quicker. And the only reason they do that, I think, is so they can progress the plot. Because otherwise, like, it was so weird, like, so the thing happens in the middle of the afternoon that everyone realizes they can't sleep. And then by the first night, so like a couple hours later, people are just in the street, like rioting. People are just out. It's already nuts. And I'm like, people go a night without sleeping all the time. Why are they acting crazy already? This would not be happening in real life. And then it's like the next scene where like, oh, by the way, it happens quicker. And I'm like, okay, they just wanted to find a reason to explain that to make it more chaotic and progress the plot. Again, this is one of those movies where the concept is very interesting, but it just, in execution, it just failed pretty spectacularly. I wouldn't recommend watching this. Like I said, this movie is not a bad movie. It just has a lot of shortcomings, more so than the rest of the movies on this list. Well, there you have it, my top 10 least favorite movies of 2021. Of course, I didn't see all the movies that 2021 had to offer, although if I'm going to be honest, I probably wasn't going to go out of my way to watch a movie that I thought I wasn't going to enjoy. But if there are any movies that you all didn't enjoy that I didn't put on this list, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be happy to discuss them with you. Maybe I did watch it and it just didn't make the list. Maybe I did watch it and it's going to be one of my top 10 favorites, which I'm just about to go and record as well. But as always, thank you all so much for watching. This is going to be my second to last video that I record and upload of the year. The next one that I'm going to record right after this and then also upload will be my top 10 best movies of 2021, so be sure to stay tuned for that.